Another prediction dies in the Donbass. How the media amplifies certainty in an uncertain war. By me at Scourge of the Spin Machine. War has always rewarded confident prophets. But if you wanted to design the worst possible system for discussing war, you would build one that rewards confidence over caution, certainty over humility, and attention over accuracy. In many respects, this is today's media. The classic war theorist Karl von Clausewitz observed more than 2 centuries ago, quote, "War is the realm of uncertainty. 3/4 of the factors on which action is based are wrapped in a fog of greater or lesser uncertainty." Yet, for more than 4 years, many of the biggest names commenting on the Russia-Ukraine war have offered one confident forecast after another, and no one seems to remember. NATO's senior mentor for logistics, Ben Hodges, a constant presence across major British outlets, predicted that Russia would be pushed back to its pre-invasion lines by the end of 2022. He later predicted the war would end with Ukrainian victory by summer 2023, including the liberation of Crimea. None of those forecasts came to pass. Another of the UK's most ubiquitous television military commentators, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, argued in September 2023 that Ukraine had a maximum of 12 months, probably less, to vanquish Russia. 12 months came and went. By September 2025, he was instead arguing that Putin's remaining strategy was simply to hang on. This week, he says that Putin is barely hanging on. But this is not simply a story about rabid warhawks. Last year, Professor Scott Lucas, whose interviews on the Times podcast attract audiences in the tens of thousands every show, suggested Russia's economy might only have 6 to 12 months before economic pressure fundamentally constrained the Kremlin's ability to continue the war. Scott was an important mentor to me and one of the best informed and respected analysts on a range of conflicts. But his year-long deadline, too, is up in August, and already he is warning we must prepare for the war to continue into next winter. That is 2027-2028. And nor is this simply an issue just for those sympathetic to Kiev. On the 27th of February 2022, the decorated former armoured commander and NATO strategic planner and briefly a senior Pentagon advisor, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, suggested Ukraine would surrender within 24 hours. The following day, he predicted the war would probably be over within 10 days. Weeks later, he declared, "The war is really over for the Ukrainians." 4 years later, it continues. Scott Ritter, former Marine intelligence officer and UN weapons inspector whose interviews have reached enormous alternative media audiences, was equally certain. Shortly before Russia's invasion, he predicted that the Ukrainian military would be annihilated in short order. When the invasion began, he declared, "This will be over in a week." He then kept resetting the deadline. In an October 2022 podcast, he said, "This isn't going to take another year and a half. This is going to take, at most, several months." This is not merely my impression. These predictions dominated television studios, newspaper columns, and social media throughout the war. A couple of years ago, a major CSIS report by Elliot Cohen and Phillips O'Brien even described the conflict as a study in analytic failure, arguing that the problem was not merely that experts were wrong, but that they expressed their judgments with remarkable certainty. Of course, the onus should be on those advocating action to get it right, much more so than those advocating negotiation. When commentators dismiss the risk of their actions provoking nuclear war, for example, they should take ownership of it. And are they really so sure? In March this year, Polymarket put the chances of a nuclear detonation by the end of 2026 at 24%. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with making predictions or informed guesses. The problem arises when forecasts presented with great confidence repeatedly fail, yet continue to supply the rationale for policies whose consequences are measured in the millions of lives. Every serious military historian knows that major wars generate surprise, friction, and unintended consequences, yet modern media compounds the already very human need for certainty and optimism. The deadlines drift by, the bodies pile up. To be clear, I do think there was a case for helping Ukraine resist Russia's invasion, especially during those desperate opening weeks. Though whether the conflict could have been avoided beforehand, including through simple diplomacy around NATO enlargement, remains a legitimate subject of debate. But there is a profound difference between supporting defensive resistance and perpetually forecasting imminent victory. Foreign policy should not be treated like football punditry, but it is. When influential analysts repeatedly assure the public that victory is just around the corner, they shape expectations, influence government, and narrow the political space for compromise. Russia or Ukraine may conceivably achieve something recognizable as victory. Perhaps Russia can be knocked back and, for some reason, not resort to bigger and bigger weapons or a widening of the war. After all, it must at least be possible to smack a bear until it's quiet, isn't it? But even in that case, our victory would be built on more than 1 million casualties, several 100,000 deaths, devastated cities, millions displaced, and a permanently more divided Europe. Ukraine will inherit a legacy of ashes. Russia will never forgive its former partners. Even an unlikely victory would only place us on the first rung of a rotted ladder. That is precisely why certainty should have been in the shortest supply. I've investigated some big conspiracies. Some went really well.
By the national security state in the United States.
Others went weird. Join me, Matthew Alford, on YouTube for short films and commentary on conspiracies, power, and propaganda.